This is the second of 5 paints in this Surfboard series. I hope you're following along. If you haven't looked at the first video, please go back and have a look at the beginning. I talk a little bit about the prep of the board and how I go about the surfboards before I even begin painting on them. And I paint on these once the surface has been prepared with my normal acrylic paints, and then I seal the board at the end. So if you're wondering what I actually use, I have used Poscas before. I don't think I've used too much oil pastel on these boards, mainly acrylic paint and spray paint. With where I'm up to now is I'm creating more layers. Basically, with the first layers, I managed to get some good colors down right across the board. So I've now got a surface that has got coverage, and interesting stories have begun. An interesting palette has begun, and I'm now going to develop on that. I'm going to develop on the colors I've already got, but they'll get a little bit more complex as I go, and I'll develop them into colors that I like. So I'm bringing in this very, very pale yellow, which is a color I use sparingly, but when I am intentionally painting something that feels a bit more beachy to me, as this board does, the pale yellow really pops when I put it on there against the other colors that remind me of the beach. There's also these light pinks. So I'm going between a pastel palette and the very bright palette and bringing in the deeper greens and browns. I've also used that gorgeous ultramarine blue, which would have been mixed with some of the lighter blue, but that really pops in a way that fluoro pink pops, and I love that. I'm in some ways creating little stories within the bigger story of the beach. So I've got this overall idea of a palette, and now I'm picking out little pieces, little areas, and creating little areas within the bigger area for stories. As I said on the last paint, the stories are intuitive. In my head, I'm potentially running through memories of the beach. I may have gone for a walk on the beach. I may be thinking of particular days that I remember as a child, travelling to Wongaparoa, if you know New Zealand, every year from Wellington for family holidays, and what that evoked in me. But also, I've spent 25 years living in Sydney, and the beach culture here is very much a big part of my memories of beaches now. So that's all in my head, and probably the music I'm listening to will affect how I'm painting these stories. So they're all things for you to think about when you've got a specific theme in mind. Evoking memories intuitively by having things like music, by maybe looking through photos, by reading books that remind you of certain things, by maybe having conversations within your family. They will all go in and then come out when you're in your creative space. That's how I work with my storytelling. I don't specifically paint anything, but it's in my psyche as I'm painting. The series is there for me over a period of a week or a couple of weeks or maybe even a month, and I trust that the memories that I have in my brain come out through my work. I've brought in this brown color, which I love bringing in a dark contrast when I'm working with very poppy, bright pinks and bright blues and lighter yellows. I like something a little bit more serious, and this deep brown would have a lot of black in it as well. Gives me the contrast, gives me the opportunity to work a little bit smaller to tell a little bit of a story. You can see how lightly I can hold the brush. I'm holding it on the very, very tip, and that allows the brush to do its own work. I'm not being too specific with the marks that I make in a lot of cases. A lot of people ask me about working on the floor and how hard that is on your back, and it can be, but number one, it's easier for us to film by putting the board on the floor rather than a table. It allows the camera to be up quite high. I love walking around my canvas. Now I'm sitting on the floor, so I can get up close and personal. There is a balance between working very, very close up and small, so I'm not really seeing the big picture, I'm just seeing little stories, and then moving back and seeing how the whole thing is working as a whole composition. I've got three, as you can see, three areas that I'm working on with this brown. And if you know, and if you've seen my any of my teachings, I do talk about this doing things 3 times across a palette will help create cohesion and story, but not overwhelm. Often I see artists and beginner artists or doing something and then doing it everywhere, and it takes away from the places where you can actually highlight it by not doing things everywhere, just in specific areas. I just say that when you do it, try and do them very differently so they speak to each other rather than being the same. They might be a same shape. As you can see, I'm working on the shape, but I've done it in 3 different ways across those 3 areas. So they speak, but they don't compete. And that's going to be an ongoing thing for me, because there will be times where maybe I do think that they compete and I'll need to change them up somewhat. So watch how often I change my brush so that I'm not repeating too much the same marks. I'm doing the marks with a different brush, which gives a whole different effect. So I keep developing this brown story, these shapes, till I get into a point where I think I've done enough on them. If I rework them anymore, then it would be too much. But I'm developing on it now with the green. So the brown had done enough, not sure where it was headed. So now I'm bringing in a transparent. This would have been made out of a green gold. I also bring other greens into it to make it a little bit less yellow, because the green gold does come through quite yellow. I love the way that this color goes against the blues and pinks. I often use green gold in my paintings, even if it's used to mix other colors. It's a beautiful transparent paint. So if you haven't used it yet, there is a green gold by Golden that I use, and there's also an Australian green gold. I think it's green gold, but it's definitely Australian, by Matisse. And they're the 2 that I use a lot. And even if they don't remain as much as I've got them on there now, they just give a quality underneath a lot of colors that I love. So once again, now that I've put on those deeper, darker layers, I go to the opposite to give balance. So here I am bringing in a bit more of that very, very pale yellow that I lost a lot in the layers that I've come over the top with. Again, I love the way that the pale yellow peeks through. I don't often leave a lot of it, but the bits that I do leave are so important in the overall painting. So I've gone back to the fluoro color, as you might have seen. Often when I'm working with a very bright color, that bright red, I put in a fluoro paint into it to make it pop. So I don't it's not necessarily a pure fluoro. It's a color that I put fluoro pink or orange into just to give it that little bit of vibrancy that I'm looking for. And with that fluoro color, I've done a little bit of what I did with the brown. I'm creating some little pops of stories and shapes to give more storytelling. And now I'm bringing in a beige, which I haven't really put into this painting before. So I'm looking at bringing in something different to give something else, maybe to tie in the brown color a little bit more in the early layers, in underlying layers, bits that will pop through. And now I've gone to quite a light pink. It's a very light pink. And in some ways, by bringing in a light pink, it's creating space and different negative areas. So if there's a place that I'm not sure if it's working, I will often do this. Here I am really going over this blue. And this is what you might see me doing quite a bit of toing and froing, which can often happen in storytelling for me. I paint one area light and then I reverse engineer it. I go over quite dark with it. And what this does in the layers is it peeks through just little bits of dark and light that you cannot get any other way but by doing layered paintings where you come over the top and you don't paint everywhere, but you paint a little bit. And you can see this story developing in the layers that I love. I love seeing the little bits that were in there in earlier layers that you actually can't almost tell where they came from. If you can see with those blue lines, I don't think that they remain like that, but I love that I'm seeing a little bit of blue with that much lighter blue over the top. It's interesting to me to have these shapes appearing. The composition itself is going quite a different area, but I know I've got a few more layers that I'll be needing to do on this. So it's not bothering me to lose areas that I loved. I know that the sort of stories that were there in the earlier layers will be there in the final layers. I will intuitively remember the bits that I loved and they'll come back in. And I do see a lot of artists really worry about painting over stuff that they love. And I find that it just holds me captive. I have to paint loosely in order for the magic to happen. So I really do let go of the things that I love for the sake of the overall painting. This is a very light beige, and I often do that. I bring in colors with different tones. So this is a much lighter tone than the beige that I brought on before, but they speak to each other. They would have been made out of the similar pots. So that's often what I do when I'm mixing paint in pots. I pour a little bit of one pot into the next so that I'm getting this consistency of the paint colors through the palette. This is a beigey, but I've probably put a little bit more of a pink tone into this. So now you've got beiges and you've got light pinks and you've got light yellows that are all speaking of this beautiful pastel, light, bright summer day. I hope you follow along with this surfboard series. I'd love you to comment and let me know if you're enjoying it, if you paint surfboards yourself, if you're inspired to paint on a different substrate. I'd love for you to comment, ask me questions. I'd also love it if you liked my page and if you shared my page with anyone that you think might enjoy the content. I really appreciate you being here, and I really do love reading your comments. So I'll look out and I'll come and answer any questions that you ask. And we'll be back with another 3 videos in this series. So I hope you come back to watch.